My kitchen still carried the faint sugary smell of leftover frosting from the reception 2 days earlier. The wedding flowers, once bright and fragrant, were already starting to droop in the vase on my counter. Everything in the room felt familiar, yet strangely unsettled. Maybe it was because my daughter, Sophia, sat across from me looking like a newly crowned queen, radiant, exhausted, still glowing from her vows. Her new husband, Julian, had taken the seat beside her like he owned the space. His posture was relaxed, far too relaxed for someone meeting his mother-in-law after a wedding, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. His arm rested behind her chair, a gesture pretending to be protective but feeling more like possession. We were only a few minutes into small talk when he opened his leather briefcase and slid a thick envelope across my polished table. It stopped right at the base of my teacup. The movement was gentle, but the intent behind it wasn't. "This will make things easier moving forward," he said, his voice smooth enough to chill the room. Sophia nodded quickly. "It's nothing serious, Mom, just some planning stuff. Julian's really good with finances, and we're setting up future safeguards. For when we have kids." I forced a smile, even as something cold twisted in my stomach. My full name was printed on the envelope in a crisp, businesslike font. Too formal. Too intentional. Julian stood, brushing invisible dust from his suit jacket. "Take your time looking it over. We're flying to Santorini tomorrow, but handling this early will save us a lot of hassle later." I didn't open the envelope until their car disappeared down the long oak-lined drive. When I finally tore it open, the papers nearly slipped from my hands. It wasn't simple planning. It wasn't even a suggestion. It was a pre-written financial agreement, one that quietly assumed I was ready to contribute a significant portion of my estate into a Croft-managed trust. My throat tightened. They had no idea what they were actually reaching for. It wasn't just a family home or a modest investment account. They didn't know about the hidden holdings my late husband, Robert, left behind. They didn't know I had spent years keeping that secret buried for a reason. I read every line twice, and when I finished, one truth hit me with absolute clarity. Julian wasn't planning for a family. He was planning a takeover. But if he thought he was the only strategist at the table, he was about to learn how wrong he was. Because the next morning, someone knocked on my door with a second contract won that made the first look harmless. I barely slept that night. Julian's documents sat on my desk like a silent threat, and every time I closed my eyes, his polished smile resurfaced. I knew men like him, men who treat affection the same way they treat investments, calculated, strategic, and always in their favor, but I hadn't expected him to move this fast. Or this boldly. The next morning, sunlight poured through my kitchen windows as I tried to calm my nerves with a cup of tea. I hadn't even lifted the cup when a firm, deliberate knock echoed through my hallway. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, a man stood on my porch holding a slim briefcase. Middle-aged, neatly dressed, wearing the kind of expression that told me he had delivered plenty of messages people didn't want to hear. "Mrs. Vance?" he asked politely. "Yes," I replied cautiously. He handed me a document. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I represent Mr. and Mrs. Julian Croft regarding a matter that requires immediate acknowledgement." That word immediate hit me harder than it should have. I stepped slightly into the doorway, blocking his view of the house. "My daughter's name is Sophia Vance," I corrected, keeping my tone cool. His smile wavered for a moment. "Of course." "My apologies. May I come in?" Every instinct told me to say no, but refusing him meant staying blind. So I stepped aside only enough for him to enter. He walked in with the quiet confidence of someone who believed he already had the advantage. Setting his briefcase on my dining table, he opened it and slid out a new stack of papers. The title read, "Emergency Addendum, Family Asset Integration." My chest tightened. He flipped to a highlighted section. This clause, he explained smoothly, ensures that all parental assets are disclosed for future trust structuring. It's for long-term security. I stared at the heading, Section 7.2, Parental Estate Disclosure and Pre-Inheritance Verification Not Requested. Not optional, expected, and at the bottom, Sophia's signature. Her rushed, looping handwriting, my stomach dropped. Did she sign this willingly? Was she pressured? Did she even read it? Marcus continued, young couples often move quickly. Trust is very natural at this stage. Wrong thing to say, very wrong. I leaned forward, folding my hands. Tell Mr. Croft, I said evenly, that nothing, absolutely nothing, will be signed until my attorney reviews it. A crack formed in his polished demeanor. And when should they expect your response? He asked stiffly. I walked to the door and pulled it open. When I decide to give it, he packed his papers and left without another word. The click of the door latch sounded like a gunshot in an empty room. As soon as he drove off, I grabbed my phone. There was only one person who could help me now. Arthur Sterling, my late husband's closest friend, and one of the few men whose loyalty I never had to question. Arthur, I said the moment he answered, I need you. And not for a review. I need you to build something for me. His voice was steady. What do you need? And I told him, a trap. A believable one. A trail Julian would chase without hesitation. But before my plan even started, Julian made the first move, and it was far more dangerous than I expected. Arthur didn't waste a second. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees that evening, he had already put together a mock inheritance, summary clean, believable, legally airtight, and boring enough to lull anyone with bad intentions. Exactly what we needed. The fabricated report painted a modest financial picture, a shrinking estate, a handful of scattered accounts, and just enough leftover assets to make a greedy man think the well had already run dry. Nothing impressive, nothing worth chasing, nothing worth fighting over. Make it boring, I told him. Boring men overlook, he replied with a small laugh. But remember, boring things still leave a trail, and a guy like Julian, he can't resist pulling at threads. So I placed the decoy file on my desk out in the open, positioned just carelessly enough to look like a private document I'd forgotten to put away. Anyone snooping, even subtly, would find it without trying. That was the point. And sure enough, it didn't take long. 4 days later, my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. I almost ignored it until I read the alert. Fraud alert. Suspicious access attempt detected. Someone had tried to access a dormant account under my maiden name, an account only 2 people knew existed, me and Sophia. My heartbeat jumped. They weren't fishing anymore. They were digging. And if that was the account they went for, then they had already found the decoy file. Exactly as planned, but the speed, the boldness, that shook me more than I expected. That evening, I sat alone in my study, the fake inheritance summary in one hand and Julian's original contract in the other. My anger softened, replaced by something much heavier grief. My daughter was thousands of miles away on her honeymoon, blissfully unaware, while her husband and his people sifted through the pieces of my life like scavengers searching for scraps. That's when I knew. This couldn't stay a quiet defense. If I stayed passive, he'd just find new angles, new pressure points. A man like him doesn't to stop until he thinks he's drained every last dollar within reach. Strategy wasn't enough anymore. I had to face him, but not with anger. Anger only makes men like Julian defensive. It makes them retreat, hide, plot. No, my weapon had to be something he'd never expect. Gratitude, a thank you he wouldn't trust, a calm he couldn't read, a softness that wasn't softness at all, just bait. The next morning, I called Sophia. Wayne from the ocean blew through the speaker when she answered. Sweetheart, I said gently, when are you 2 coming home? Tomorrow, she said, surprised. Everything okay? Tell Julian, I continued, keeping my voice warm. I've looked over everything. I think it's time we sit down and talk this through properly. Lunch is on me. She gasped with excitement, and it twisted something deep in my chest. Mom, that's amazing. I knew you'd come around, but before I could breathe, another message pinned. Mom, Julian says you threatened him. Please don't be upset. We just want peace. Threatened him? No. He was twisting the story, trying to flip the script before the truth had a chance to come out. Trying to turn my own daughter against me. That was the moment I realized this man wasn't just greedy. He was dangerous. Because at that point, I understood lunch wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a battleground. I wasn't about to let Julian twist the story before I even had a chance to speak. If he wanted to paint me as irrational, controlling, or paranoid, then I needed someone there who could see everything clearly, someone who wouldn't fall for his charm. So before lunch, I called Arthur back. You're coming with me, I said. As your attorney? He asked. No, I replied. As a friend. No briefcase, no legal talk. Just be there, watch, listen, and be ready. He agreed without hesitation. The next day, I booked a small table at a quiet garden, cafe-neutral ground. Public enough to keep things civil, private enough for the real conversation we needed to have. I arrived early and tried to look calm, even though my stomach was tight with nerves. They arrived right on time. Julian, in a pale linen suit that probably cost more than some people make in a month, wore that same polished charm he always carried like armor. Sophia walked beside him, but her eyes told a different story, uneasy, unsure, torn between loyalty and fear. A few minutes later, Arthur showed up, looking comfortably ordinary in a soft gray shirt and slacks. I introduced him casually. He works in insurance, I said lightly. Julian's eyes narrowed for half a second quick, suspicious, but his smile stayed in place. For now, we started with forced small talk, weather, their honeymoon, the cafe pastries. None of it felt real, like we were actors reading lines from a play we all hated. Eventually, Julian leaned forward, elbows on the table, expression full of practiced sincerity. I want to clear the air, he began. I never meant to pressure you, Eleanor. I just wanted to make sure Sophia and I are building a secure future together. He reached into his bag and slid the same manila envelope toward me. I brought the paperwork again. In case he felt ready, I held his gaze. Then I reached into my purse and laid my own document on top of his, the decoy inheritance summary Arthur prepared. This, I said calmly, is everything. Sophia's eyes widened. Julian's face didn't move, but I saw it, the calculation, the disappointment, the greed grinding to a halt. $240,000 wasn't worth a long dame. Not worth manipulation, not worth risk. 240,000, I repeated softly, after tying up everything from Robert's passing. That's all that was left. Sophia looked crushed. Ma, I didn't know. You thought your father left more, I said gently. I didn't want you worrying. Julian's smile thinned into a tight line. He stood abruptly. I need the restroom. We watched him walk away. As soon as he disappeared inside, Sophia whispered, voice shaking, Mom, did you really threaten him? No, I said quietly. But I did tell him I wouldn't sign anything without a full legal review. Maybe that scared him. Arthur didn't say a word, just watched, listened, absorbing every detail like he was studying a crime scene. When Julian returned, everything about him had changed. His voice was softer, too soft. You're right, he said. We should take our time. They'll trust the old-fashioned way. None of them felt true. Lunch ended with quick hugs and fake warmth. They walked away hand in hand, but I could feel the storm forming behind them. I hadn't won. I had just bought myself a little time. Because that night, my bank called, and that innocent trust paperwork suddenly became a crime.